Okay, so the first story, I thought, on the video I mentioned before, and of course I happened to mention the fact about the time that I derailed a train, and of course that's the one that pricked up everyone's interest, I suppose, but somewhat by reason that was put in there in the first place, I suppose. And so I thought I'd mention that story, get that one out of the way, and maybe mention some other sort of railway stories or history or whatever. Actually, that photo there you can see there. I mean, I've got friends who worked on the road, got loads and loads of photographs of themselves. As far as I'm aware, that's just about the only photograph of me actually driving a train. And as you can see from it, it was taken in the early 1980s, and it was on an engine driving a freight train. And I know it was taken very near Sevenoaks, as it happens, because I can actually remember the guy who took the photo, and I don't know why he had his camera and was taking photos. And that's just about the only one. Sorry about the hairstyle; it looks a bit awful, but there you go, just to prove it. Every boy's dream, supposedly. Not necessarily mine. It was one of those things that I sort of drifted into, but maybe that's a story for another day. But this particular time, I've just been looking for a press cutting because I know this story actually made the made the news in well, locally certainly, because it completely messed up all the track and put a stop to the job, as we would say, for a couple of days while things were sorted out. I can't even remember exactly what year it was now, but it's got to be at least 10 years ago now. Probably even more than that, and it was like a Thursday afternoon or something like that, and I was just going up into the sidings at Hastings to get an 8-coach train out of the sidings down into the station, and then I believe I was going up, taking the train up to London. Walked up to the sidings as per usual, walked through the train, did all the sort of usual checks and everything that you're supposed to do, went up the back and had a look around. Everything was perfectly normal, everything seemed perfectly normal. Sat there ready to go, and then the signal comes off, as we would say, and and because of the sort of the way that the lay of the land was, I used to sort of give a little bit of power, and then it used to sort of train would sort of go over the slight rise and drift down into Hastings Station, and coming out the side, it's only doing about 5 miles an hour, so you're not exactly motoring, which is even even more luck, I suppose, in some ways. As I started moving off, so giving it a little bit of power and just moving off, and we had little indicators on the desk in front of us to show the power and to show that the generators and that were working, because it was an electric multiple unit, as we call it. Bit third rails, a bit different down in the southeast of England. They've got a different system to, no overhead lines or anything like that. It's like a third rail, and so that you have something that detects the fact that you've actually got detection that you are actually getting power through the third rail, and there was another indication there as well to tell you that the generators were all working. They were getting power, doing what they should be. As we were moving along, very soon after we started off, or I started, I was on my own. I'm the only person on the train. Moving off, 2 of the indicators went off, and the one that tells me that I got power and the generator one went, and they sort of flickered and they went off and come back. And this is something that used to happen a fair amount, because it could be just a slight problem with the power somewhere, not necessarily with your train, but it could be a general thing, and sometimes it go off, and as long as it came back on, so you just sort of used to let yourself sort of roll, cruise, whatever, and let it come back on. And sure enough, it did come back on. I thought, well, that's fair enough. But I thought, this doesn't feel quite right. But anyway, the indicator, I'll give it another 15 seconds, probably not as much as that, as it happens. Time changes in these sort of scenarios. And then they went off again, and I thought, this doesn't feel right to me. There's something, it doesn't, that sort of sixth sense or something. When you've been driving trains or been around like driving a car or anything in that sort of, any job that you do and you get used to doing it, manufacturing or anything, you sort of got this sort of sixth sense. Something isn't quite right. So I stopped the train. And I thought, right, so it was a natural reaction. You look out the window, and I looked out the window, and I could just see dust everywhere. And I thought, this doesn't look good to me. So I think I called the. That's right. I looked back, and then I thought, I don't know what's wrong here. So I had to walk back and had a look. And after the second coach, the third coach was over at an angle like this, and that was the coach that all the motors and the generators were on, because it's a heavier coach, so that was the one that had derailed, and it was sort of at an angle like this, and I thought, oh shit, as you can imagine. Well, that so I went back, called up the signal, and I said, look, I think we've got a problem here. And my first reaction, as it would be for any train driver at the time, is, hang on a minute, did I have that signal? Was that signal in my favour? Have I, you know, sort of gone past the signal of danger? You know, a driver's worst nightmare. And because the points were set wrong because of that, I've been derailed for that reason, if you see what I mean. He assured me that no, that wasn't the case at all. No, the signal was perfectly clear. I was clear to go. I said, well, I'm going to go back just to make sure again. I said, and I'll get back to you. And so I walked back and had a proper look this time. And sure enough, as I said, it's over at this angle and I couldn't go any further. And so I went back and explained the situation, you know, whatever. And he had to shut all the lines and everything. Because it got to the point where if I'd have gone much further, and I'm literally, if I'd have gone about another coach length of the train in distance, I think that third coach, I believe it was, would have tipped right over. It was at that sort of angle because of the weight on it and everything like that. But one of the things that amazed me at the time was, because this happens, as I said, it's a worst nightmare, you know, and you're on your own and you're thinking, oh my God, it was that sort of feeling of calm and everything's sort of slowing down. Anyone who's been in a situation like that, you know, people talk about having car accidents or any sort of major trauma or something like that, and hopefully you've never had that. And time sort of slows down and everything happens, and you sort of feel a bit detached and sort of quite calm by it. And it's one of the things when I look back on the whole incident that makes me think, wow, that was a bit strange. And the thing that got me was just how calm I felt, because at the time you know, you're not thinking about all these things are going through your head, but you know, obviously you've derailed a train. Is it your fault? Is it something that you've done? Is you know, and then you know you're going to get tested for drink and drugs and all that. Yes, I knew I was clean, but you never know. You know, that's just an added burden, isn't it? And then there's all the other implications and everything like this around it, and the disciplinary stuff and God knows what else, because they can find out how fast you were going. Were you going too fast? I said, ultimately, was it your fault? So, so when I had a look and say that the coach was leaning over like this, and it was obvious that, you know, this was a fairly major problem. It wasn't on the main line, but because of the way that it was and the siding was next to the main line, they had to shut the main line, partly because I think the train had gone over cables and this sort of stuff, and the line was shut for about a day, I believe, and they had to get cranes in and all this sort of thing to move it around. What happens, as it turned out, that I was exonerated, thankfully. You know, I'd done everything I could, I suppose, and wasn't going too fast, etc., etc. Was that the track was in such a condition that it just literally went. The weight of that third coach, as I said, with all the generators and the motors and all that sort of stuff, the weight of that particular coach had the road had spread, as we would call it, the condition that it was in. Some of these sidings probably a bit different now, but certainly back in that sort of 10-15 years ago, some of them were in pretty bad condition, with the old wooden sleepers. Some of these sleepers could be decades and decades old, and they just given way. Maybe it's a bit of dampness, and I think there was quite a lot of water in that particular area as well. So if I had been going a bit faster, and I know other people, other drivers around probably would have been. I'm not saying that I was an angel by any means, but you know, there for the grace of God go I another day, and you know, and you might have been in a bit of a rush, and you might have been going a little bit faster for some reason, and you know, that train would have tipped over, and it'd been a lot worse. Also, from my point of view, it was lucky that there was no one else on the train. There were no passengers. It wasn't in passenger service and all this sort of stuff. And, so there wasn't that added complication. It was a bit out of the way, so you didn't have to worry about other trains being in the vicinity and potentially running into you or something like that. That wasn't an issue as well. So if you're going to do it, I suppose that's the best place to do it. Not a nice scenario, as I said. It did make me real to sort of wonder, you know, how you're going to cope with this, because you never know with these things. How on earth would I cope if that sort of thing happened? As I said, if that was the worst, that's not too bad. That's probably the worst experience that I had when I was driving. I did have another experience. I've had more than one experience of derailments, but not necessarily caused or I wasn't involved in. It was once when I was at Tunbridge, sitting on an engine, waiting to come out of the sidings there, out into the station onto the main line, and a train was coming in, a freight train was coming with, and it's full of rails. It's called continuously welded track we have now, so it's big long sections of rails. So it's a long wagons with all these, you know, obviously the metal rails on the top. The train was coming in. We had to wait for this one to come in before we went out. And as it came in, about, I think it was just after the engine, the first wagon derailed as it came in, and you can see it coming towards you, and it started going sort of sideways and sliding towards you, and you just get into that point, and once again it all seemed to happen in slow motion, and there's dust and all this sort of stuff going on. Once again, the driver wasn't really aware of what was going on at first, probably a very similar situation to what I had, and then suddenly thought, hang on a minute, something doesn't feel right, and stopped. We were getting the middle, because I had someone else with me in the cab, and we were just thinking, right, we're getting to that point, we're thinking, we're going to have to move in a minute, because this was coming gradually towards you, and you've got all these rails and whatever, you know. No danger of fires or anything like that particularly, but, you know, you've got all these, God knows, tons and tons of rails and wagons and ballast and God knows what else coming towards you. Not very fast, once again, at only a slow speed. So there you go. That's the sort of story about that. I probably will remember others. Other people have got other stories. There are certain things that I'm not going to talk about for lots of different reasons. So that's a little idea of that. I know some people are interested in railways, and people have got, you know, this sort of life dream about, you know, when I tell people that that's what I did. Wow, did you do this? Did you do that? Probably, but I suppose it's like lots of those things. You don't necessarily think of it until you think back, and you think, well, actually, yeah, that was quite good. I did this and did that, and I drove this and I drove that, and all that stuff. So maybe I will sort of relay that and try and find some pictures. That said, I won't be in them, but maybe try and find them. I was hoping to put that news clip from the local paper on there with a picture of the actual the problem, but as I said, I can't find it anywhere. I'll have another little quick look around, but I'd be interested to know what you think about that story. Did it live up to expectations? But as I said, I then had, because of the issues around it, and because you had to have a drink and a drugs test, and they couldn't let you back on the track until that had all been cleared, that sort of gave me a few days off. Effectively, I had to be at work, so, you know, it was quite an interesting time. And as I said, there's a sort of a weight hanging over you while they do all the measurements and all this sort of stuff, the investigations that go on to find out exactly what had happened. And thankfully, as I said, I was exonerated. Otherwise, I may well have left the railway a lot earlier, what I eventually did. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed that little story. I'll speak to you again soon. Goodbye.